chapters are still very much theory, and if you read through it, I think you guys will have ample information to actually do your discussions in the exam and in the task. Okay, so just starting out on this chapter, you will see chapter 7 is all about and it's an introduction to the network perspective on innovation in construction. So it's all about networking and how innovation in networking can actually influence your construction site or the construction. So innovation in the construction industry, an industrial network perspective on innovation, so that's what we just indicated, but understanding the innovation as a resource, interaction, the interaction process between the different people. Now you will see in chapter 8 how this relates to that section. So firstly, the resources of company can be divided into the products, the facilities, the organizational units, organizational relationships. So it's the method that these functions communicate to each other. One example of all these communication sets is the way that we use BIM, for instance, where you get information from suppliers on a specific project or product that you can actually incorporate into your bill, or not in your bill, into your model, and then all the information, the looks, and the specifications is linked to that item in your model that you have built. So that's one example of how innovation is taking communication from the suppliers to the actual contractor. It's a much more visual method of actually transferring information. Okay, so the experimental examples is the picture that emerges is that the companies temporarily and pragmatically adopt their separate resources in each and every project without actually inducing long-term or mutual change and of learning. So this is basically a repetition of what we've been saying up to thus far. So the preliminary conclusion of this chapter is that in this chapter we examine the implications of an industrial network perspective concerning our understanding of innovation in construction. In construction, subcontractors and suppliers often account for 60 to 80% of the total cost of the project. Okay, indicating the importance of the supply network construction companies. Okay, and then new solutions, inventions in one project are difficult to transfer to other projects when the constellations are ever changing. Okay, so the main thing is that what this chapter just reiterates for us is that it's difficult to transfer information from one project to a new project, and where BIM information promises to actually assist in this process of transferring information from one project to the next. Okay, so that's basically it that I want to highlight from this chapter, but I still want you guys to read through it. I just want to see, there's a couple of items here that I just underlined. Okay, and yeah, I think that's more or less it. I think the three aspects, that's the only thing that which I didn't identify in the chapter. They talk about three aspects that follow from an industrial network perspective and use them to examine various examples of innovation in construction from ongoing research program on the innovation in Swedish and Norwegian construction industry. This is now on page 90. Basically, they looked at three aspects: innovation in the construction industry, industrial network perspective on innovation, and then they looked at understanding innovation as rescue interaction processes. So just take note of those three headings of how they actually did their research. So that's more or less it. I think there's not a lot from this chapter to learn, but I want you guys to read through it. Okay, then we get to chapter 8. Now, chapter 8 is a bit of a combination of what we've learned now in chapter 7. And it's all about the networks and how information diffuses from one project and from one company to another company. Okay, or in the industry. So firms do not innovate in vacuums. Obviously, innovation occurs over firms, but for instance, new materials from products has to be marketed. So you have marketers, so the supplier markets itself with the architects, with construction managers, and so forth. Innovation range from small advances in construction methods, materials, and technology to radical procurement routes. Okay, so that's always also straightforward. It should not only be a fashion, but it is a way of it's a culture that one needs to cultivate. And then there's a few central themes that we're going to look at. So innovation diffuses across firms. Just the last thing on the introduction, the chosen focus here is medium-sized and typical regional-based construction firms rather than the big guns, because statistical continually demonstrate that groups of smaller firms undertake more than 80% of the sector output. So basically, the short and the long is in this research that they did is they basically looked at the bigger portion of the construction industry as a whole. Okay, so now what they found was that there's a couple of central themes that run through all through the diffusion of information. Innovation, methods, materials, and technologies, and radical procurement. Okay, we spoke about that. So the central themes are it is a core message in this volume that innovation can be viewed in many different ways. In this chapter, innovation is understood not to be fixed, but to be readily occurring during the diffusion process. You have different stages. So the first stage, the notion of awareness and the role it plays in the process. The ability to become aware of innovation in the first instance is unique at all levels. So you have actors, project departments, firms, networks of firms, and sectorial innovation. So thus you need to actively search for information and educate yourself on what types of innovation there is. Okay, thus understanding awareness, who has it and who in which firms have the network of firms you have embedded in important consideration. The main thing is some firms invest a lot in new innovation, but it's a risky business because not all new innovations can be used, so it's a lot of resources or money to pay a resource to look for innovation methods. Okay, then the one thing that we did conclude is that information cannot diffuse in isolation. Okay, so the challenge that the guys had during this research process was actually just mapping the process of how information is diffused between people, and this is the couple of networks that I'm going to show you guys now. Remember, this is not all the networks that's included in the books or in the book. Please have a look that you look at all of them. So diffusion in networks is the first one that we're going to look at. So innovation diffusion networks for one actor within one firm. So basically they're looking at a person, which is you, and then advice coming from the suppliers and architects or innovative people or etc. So or guys that's worked on previous projects with information. So you can see there's a direct link to you, and then you maybe speak to Chris or whoever, or John, or you convey that message further to whoever, and that person diffuses it to a new person. And then so I want you guys to specifically look at the red dots that we've got here. Is so we've got the advice that reaches you, we've got a friend who also speaks to someone who speaks to another friend who speaks to you, or you speak to a friend who, another friend, and who speaks to that friend, and that information is transferred like that. So you can see we're just going to follow one. So for instance, here you spoke to one person, okay, and he speaks to Bruce, and Bruce now gets information from another friend from you also, and so it diffuses between friends or from other people, other advisors. Maybe someone saw something on the television or on the internet of possible solutions, and it diffuses like that. And just something which I want to highlight to you, for instance, here you've got your friend and you speaking to one person. So now you've got the same information reaching the same person, this Max Strong, and also that same original source of information also getting the message out to this person. So now he's getting more information from 3 different sections, which just confirms or gives that information that's being transferred more credibility. So that's basically how it works. It depends on how many people you reach, how many people talks about it, and so forth. So that's more or less how it works. It looks very confusing, but it's actually something that we confronted with each day, is the amount of true information that we get. Okay, then I just want to highlight some new inventions that's on the market. Usually the new inventions the people don't have much money, so it diffuses quite slowly here from the side. But for instance, this guy here at this side has a lot of information or lots of resources, so he has lots of money and lots of connections, so he can easily transfer his information. Trust. And okay, then the other external factors that they just list here is trust. People that trust you will obviously have more, you will carry more value in your advice that you give, and to other things than other people that do not have the same credibility that you have, for instance. Then something else that also plays a part into all of this is drivers. For instance, if you've got new innovation and the government suddenly says, no, we're going to drive green energy, we're going to give you a VAT rebate on new solar panels that you install, obviously that will be a driver in the industry for a new technology like solar power also. So I think that's more or less in a nutshell what this figure represents. And then the next one that I want to show you guys is the network of firms enacting the innovation diffusion process. So the previous one was individuals, now we're looking at firms enacting information on each other. So you've got a driver, for instance, now the solar panel thing. So now the architects here, and they have to design greener buildings, and they have to get a green star rating. And so now the government is pushing for that solar panels to be installed. So that's the driver. And then you've got your trust. These architects have a certain trust in certain suppliers, for instance QuickHot, and now QuickHot also brings out their new solar panel heaters. So now that's trust also enacting on the architect. Socialize, now he goes to a social event, and this architect gets information on that solar events of, have you heard about this new thing of this new solar technology that the guys are doing or installing. It's much cheaper than other installations. Then he has another friend that gives him the same information. You have inventors who gives him information. Okay, and then he obviously forms his opinion with all the information that he got from this side. Okay, and then communication is how to communicate this information. So so this architect obviously gives out gets all this information from his professional team. So now he's on a professional team and he needs to make a decision, and now he says, look, I've heard about this. What does the structural engineer say? Okay, the structural engineer can't say much about the solar heaters, but the mechanical and electrical consultant has a big influence on the decision that the architect might have. So he has in the end to approve what the architect says. So this is now how the information flows back and forth between networks and firms. Hi students, then the figure 3 in your study or in your handbook, I just quickly want to discuss as well. It's a little bit different than 8.2, but with the main difference, it's a little bit more complex. So this is another way that communication of information or transfer of information can take place. So you've got your opinions and your trust and your connections. It's just showing a little bit more complexity. So this is another scenario or way of innovation diffusion that you can find in the industry. So you will have it illustrates a more complex innovative diffusion network between the firms. Like the previous network of 8.2, this network presents one firm within a group of firms engaged on one particular project. Okay, so it means that on a project you may have different types of firms actually in acting on the information transfer. Then the key point regarding this figure is that there are more connections and far stronger connections with stakeholders outside of the firm than actually within it. And that sometimes happens with if you're working for a large firm, that not necessarily everyone is located in one location. So for instance, one will have a branch in Bloemfontein, so thus the consultant, like the electrical consultant, might be also from Bloemfontein, which is not in the firm, although the firm has internal electrical engineers, but they may sit in another place like Pretoria or Cape Town or wherever. And thus you have a stronger connection with the local external service provider than actually the internal one. So this is basically what this figure illustrates. And then also in the next figure 8.4 just basically illustrates a stagnant type of arrangements where the guys, it's usually the older firms that have their set of people, and there's a large amount of trust within those guys, so they're usually not open for new technology or new innovative way of thinking. They want to get the job done and want to get it right. It's almost they're set in their ways and they know that it works. So it's and this is the other scenario that's given. Yeah, please take note of this figure as well that explains this relationship. Okay, then we skip network diagrams. 8.3 network. Figure 8.3 is network of firms enacting the innovation diffusion process. I just continued. It gives you a bit more perspective, so I want you guys to actually go through that for me. And then 8.4 is also network firms enacting the innovation diffusion process. So I just looks at other enactors of diffusion. So I want you guys to have a look at that for me as well. And the important one that I want you guys to have a look at is your network of firms, your innovation diffusion within one firm. So this is now a combination of those two networks, basically in the broader environment, built environment. So firstly, you have your network of firms. That's the one that we just looked at. And then we've got the one actor. And then there's some information that's transferred from one person to another. And this person might be an actor in one of these firms that we've got here. So we've got a project manager, communication manager, etc. Okay, so this is basically the interaction between them, and then you've got the network of firms enacting on each other. Then you've got peer pressure. What does my friend say? My friend, they used this new thing, but they classified as this a new innovative company, and why aren't we getting more innovation out there? So that's why this peer pressures and all-encompassing item within innovation diffusion. And then you've got the broader institutional forces that enacts on this. That's now the government, for instance, promoting solar panel heating also. Okay, so I want you guys to be able to list these items: negotiate the space, contextualize thresholds, and then you've got your group link between the different items. That's now the link that I spoke about here, going through there. Power, how much power does a person have? And then selective exposure, which plays a big role, is what type of conferences are you attending, what type of courses are you attending, are you actively looking for new innovative information diffusion. Okay, and then obviously the actors that impose diffusion on a firm and on the industry. And then we've got the notion of needs. The notion of needs is perspective. That's the public interest, the public narrative. For instance, if you look at cars a while back, the bigger the engine, the more power it had, the more or that was the driving force behind car development. Nowadays, it's being efficient, being having the car that can get the most out of every ounce or every drop of petrol or diesel from our car. So the notion of needs is the public driver or interest. Okay, so just to close off, you guys will have to be able to draw this little diagram and explain to me what the negotiations of space is, the contextual threshold, the group think of how this network or group actually influences individual actors or friends and communication. So this is quite important that you guys know this diagram and be able to draw this diagram, but don't worry too much about the extensive connections there. Okay, guys, so that's more or less this slide, and that's what we've got ahead for this week. So thank you.